ক্লিক করুন অ্যাপের বেল আইকনে আর সাবস্ক্রাইব করুন এবিপি আনন্দ। সব সময় থাকুন খবরে।
নমস্কার, দেখছেন এবিপি আনন্দ, আপনাদের সঙ্গে আমি কুসুমিতা। As you know, in every weekend we have classes for ICSE and IC students, and likewise today is Saturday, so today is the time for ICSE students. We have our scheduled class, and today we have English, and our topic is a poetry, The Patriot by Robert Browning. And today we are privileged to have with us Council for the Indian School Certificate Examination selected ma'am Shuchishmita Raha. Once again, ma'am, welcome to our lockdown classroom show.
Thank you so much.
And you have the opportunity to call us, and directly you can ask your questions, your queries to Shuchishmita ma'am. Our phone number is 2460-5572 or 73. So let's start our program. Ma'am, today's chapter we know the poetry, The Patriot by Robert Browning. First, I would like to know about the poet.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session of your classroom. And of course, as Kushumika said, we are going to do a very important poem in your syllabus. It's called The Patriot by Robert Browning. Robert Browning was a 19th century poet and playwright, and he was a contemporary of Lord Tennyson. He brought many of the aspects of a play into his poems. You might have read his famous poem, The Pied Piper of Hamelin, in your earlier classes. There are certain special stylistic features to his poem, which we will discuss as the class goes on. And if you permit, Kushumika, may I start with the poem? Before I go into the poem proper, I would like to tell you what are the main ideas or the theme of the poem, because this is one question that keeps coming to you for your ICSE exam. One is, and you'll relate to it once we read the poem, the fickle nature of the crowd. As you know, how the crowd is changeable. One day it's for you, the very next day you might annoy the crowd and they will be completely against you. And also fame. Take any political figure, film star, sports star. Today you are the darling of the masses, of the crowds. They'll raise you high, they'll carry on your shoulders, they'll go on processions with you, and the very next day something might happen and you are dashed to the ground by the crowd. So these are the basic themes of the poem: the fickle nature of the crowd, the ephemeral or swiftly passing nature of fame, and the fact that the darling of the crowd today is generally is hissed and booed at by the very same crowd the very next day. The next thing that we have got to look at is the tone. What is the quality of the poem? Which tone does the speaker use? There is a speaker in the poem. The tone is reflective, because the speaker is caught at a certain moment in time and he looks back to his past. All of us, when we look back to our past, we are reflective. You know, we think about certain events in our past and we wonder about those events. Did I do right? Did I do wrong? Or did people misunderstand me? I'm purposely using these phrases because you'll find that they come in the course of the poem. As the speaker looks back to the events of a year ago. So here, that's why the word ephemeral becomes so important, swiftly passing. Or only a year ago something, his position was something, and in a year itself, it completely changes. The speaker in the poem reminisces about those golden days when he basked in the adulation of the crowd. It must be a wonderful feeling. Think about yourselves when you are voted the school captain. You know, when you win a trophy on the sports field, how your classmates, they exult for you, they call out your name, when you hit a six in a school cricket match, and you feel such a nice, warm feeling. But what do you feel when that feeling is suddenly snatched away from you? You feel cold, you feel alone, you feel isolated. And here the speaker feels the same things. Initially, the power that he feels is heady, it goes to his head, but it soon ebbs away as the people turn their backs on him. The end of the poem has a tone of resignation as the speaker then leaves everything in God's hand. And isn't that a very human thing that we do? When this happens, you know, we very often leave everything. All right, now I cannot do anything to set things right. Let God think about it. Something very important, since Kusumika ma'am also pointed it out, Robert Browning. The minute we talk about Robert Browning, a certain term comes to mind, the dramatic monologue. Now, Robert Browning actually popularized this form of writing poetry. You see, it's divided into two things, dramatic and monologue. Dramatic elements of drama. Monologue, as all of you know, very often when your teacher is teaching in class, you say, why is she, you know, this is one long monologue. There's no chance of a dialogue between us. So, therefore, a monologue, a character is caught at a critical moment in his or her life, and he's speaking out his thoughts. Why is it dramatic? Because he's speaking to a person whose presence is felt in the course of the poem. Here too, the speaker, who was the darling of the crowds, has become a person who is hated by the crowds, and is talking to someone, sometimes to himself, sometimes to someone about his condition.
Ma'am, may we take a call?
Yes, please.
Tejashi Dash is over the phone. Hello, Tejashi. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hello.
Good
Hello.
afternoon.
Actually, I couldn't follow the theme and the tone of the poem because it went too fast. So,
Okay,
Okay,
Tejashi, you just keep
You know,
listening.
we will wait till the break, and then we will continue. We'll go back to it for a while, if
Okay.
that is all right by you. Having talked to you about the dramatic monologue, let me talk about the title of the poem, The Patriot. Now, if you think about who a patriot is, whom do we term patriots? You know, think of the names that come to your mind automatically. A soldier who dies in service of his country is often called a patriot. Somebody who achieves something very great for his country, which shows his love for his country, is termed a patriot. So, it's a person who's done something great or noble for his country, and such a person, he calls himself a patriot, is speaking to us, you and I, the reader. Now, we'll have to wait and think whether he really was a patriot or he just falsely thought of himself as a patriot. As he narrates his transition, his change, his passage from love, honor and fame to hatred, notoriety. Notoriety, the opposite of fame. If you can't be famous, be notorious, people say. So, to notoriety and humiliation. The same public which raised him on their shoulders, lifted him up high, now in the passage of a year, they humiliate him. The poem, you must mark, and while we are reading it, I shall be pointing them out to you, is marked by vivid imagery and poetic images. Before I go on to the next bit, I'll read the first two stanzas. I hope all of you have your books with you, the ISC collection of poetry and prose, and it's on page 32. So, if you could quickly keep your books open, it will be easier for you to follow. It was roses, roses all the way, with myrtle mixed in my path like mad. The housetops seemed to heave and sway, the church spires flamed, such flags they had a year ago on this very day. The air broke into a mist with bells, the old walls rocked with crowds and cries. Had I said, good folk, mere noise repels, give me your sun from yonder skies, they would have answered, and afterwards, what else? So let's look at these two stanzas. The opening line plunges us into the middle of its narrative. He doesn't say, well, it began one day. You know, we've got to imagine what exactly he had done. That's just hinted at. It's not told to us very explicitly. All right, and this term, which has become quite famous in the English language, it was roses, roses all the way. So, literally also, it was roses, roses being spread all over, but also the fact that, you know, these people had planned a public welcome. Now, think of the public welcome. Think of the time when India comes back winning any tournament at cricket, all right, or when our players and any of our athletes win a gold medal at any of the international events, Mary Kom or anybody of that, how we greet her, we shove flower petals in their path. All right, we garland them, we crowd the streets to look at them. So here also it was roses, roses all the way, and with myrtle. Rose, of course, as you know, the different colors of the rose. Myrtle is a white flower, and both these flowers are very sweet smelling. All right, so the sweet smell of fame will be contrasted later on in the poem with the, you know, the kind of rotting smell of treachery, of humiliation, of rejection. All right, so you get in your minds, that's why I talked of a vivid imagery. In your minds you can see this beautifully flower bedecked path on which he is treading. So this is the love, an expression of the love and the adulation of the people. Then you get the people, again in India it's very, very common, isn't it? So we can easily identify the house, the image of the housetops heaving and swaying, moving. You know, again you can see this is personification. A house cannot move, but the people there were so many there that the houses seemed to surge like a wave and sway with the crowd of the people, with the people shouting and calling out his names and showing their public adulation of him. The houses were crowded with people. The church spires, now the spire is the turret of a church, that is the pointed part of the roof of a church. And he says the church spire flame. Now think of a flame, orange flames, red flames licking the sky, isn't it? So could the church spires flame? No, the fire spires, it's a metaphor. The spires were like flames. Why? Because they had festooned it with the church spire with so many flags of vivid colors. So it seemed as if the church spire was on flame.
Ma'am, excuse
Yes.
me, may we take a call?
Please do.
Moli Goswami is waiting for a response from Howrah. She's calling from Howrah. Hello, Moli.
Hello.
Hello.
My question is that what was his misdeed? Because many times they for his years misdeed. My question was that what was his misdeed?
Obviously it was a misdeed which he's again just as he doesn't tell us what was his fame, he doesn't tell us what was his misdeed. Something that he did probably did not strike the public as correct. All right, so it might have been, see, we're talking of a person in public life. Do all what they do we approve of all that they do? Sometimes we see them as traitors. You know, sometimes they do things in good spirit, but then we do not approve of that. So it might be any of this, as long as we know that the crowd perceive. Remember, there are two perceptions here in this poem. The perception of the speaker, who doesn't think he's done anything wrong, and the perception of the crowd, who thinks he has betrayed them in some way. All right. So yes,
Ma'am, another phone
yes,
call is there
certainly,
for us.
certainly.
From Bardhaman, Shamriddhi Dotto is calling us. Hello.
Hello, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My question is that what is the meaning of myrtle in the first stanza?
Myrtle is a kind of flower, and it's white normally in color, and it's very sweet smelling. All right. So then he says, such flags they had, and see, because he's remembering, he's reminiscing, he's looking back. Naturally, it's seeming to be that much more, vivid in his mind, because it's such a contrast to his present. A year ago, on this very day. And see the irony, this very day was the day when he was treated with such public adulation, and now that adulation is no longer there. All right. So then he says, and he goes on to another image and uses another figure of speech. The air broke into a mist with bells. Now think about it. How is a mist? What is a mist? Small droplets of water. When you go to an ocean sometimes, or when the rain is falling very heavily, you go to close the window and you find a spray coming into your face, small droplets of rain. That is being compared to the church bells. All right. So the church bells are being rung with great fervor, with great enthusiasm by the people. So therefore, the air seemed to be filled with a mist of noise, the sweet tinkling noise of the church bells. So you have this idea of how, you know, you are the poet is appealing not only to a sense of sight, but to a sense of hearing, all right, because he is looking at the flowers, he is looking at the flags, he is also talking about the sounds that he wore. Now he goes on, there are more auditory images here. The walls rocked, rocked here means shook, the walls shook with the crowd and the cries, all right. So did the crowd really shake the walls, catch the walls and shake them? No, the reverberations, the echoes, they made the walls seem to shake, the world and walls and cries. And you know, he felt such a rush of power. You know, when you are, say again, let's put it into your kind of environment, when you win something and you know, you are the object of the adulation of your classmates, your teachers, everyone, don't you feel a very powerful feeling that you feel that you are full of power? You can do anything at that moment. So he says, had I said, he said, I felt so powerful that had I said, good folk, mere noise repels, it disturbs me, don't shout so much, but give me your sun from yonder skies, give me your sun. Again, something that's almost impossible. How can one go and pluck the sun from the skies and give it to you? But so he says that had I asked for anything impossible, all right, they would have answered, and afterwards what else? They wouldn't have said that's impossible, how can we give you this? Or, yes, yes, of course. What else do you want? All right, so you see the picture that's coming up in the first two stanzas is one of great fame, that his fame was such that it had caused a lot of excitement amongst the people, and they were not behindhand, they were not in any way quiet in trying to express their sense of excitement. They showed it in action by distributing flowers, by spreading flowers rather, not distributing, by spreading flowers all over, by hanging out flags which showed their loyalty to him, their sense of joy, but also they went on to express their joy through their cries and their shouts. The cries were so loud that even the walls rocked, all right. And in addition to that, what they did was they kept ringing the church bells. It's very common in the West, any joy, all right, it's always reflected by the ringing, the tolling of the church bells. So the church bells were rung so vigorously that it seemed like a mist of sound. It's almost very visual here too, though it's an something that that's appealing to your sense of sound, but it's also visual because the air breaks into a mist of sound. And therefore, you know, he wants to convey to you the sense of power, the sense of complete adulation of the crowd, which is why he says, if I'd even asked, I told you, do not make so much noise. You know, it's as if he's a conductor. He can, you know, by a conductor I mean a master musician. He can conduct he can control the reaction of the crowd. He don't shout so much, all right. But get me the sun from the sky. Even that would not have stopped them in their tracks. You know, they would have said, what else do they want? And what he remembers, and so this is it. And the whole irony is that it was just a year ago. All right. So we move on to the next stanza. The next stanza comes as a complete contrast. He says, alack. The word alack means alas. And you know, it sort of takes us aback even as readers. Why, everything was all right. Why does he have to use the word alack? All right, it was I who leaped at the sun. And the idea that comes from Greek mythology and the myth of Icarus and his father Daedalus. Icarus and Daedalus in Greek mythology had been imprisoned in the island of Crete, Crete. Now, to escape from there, Daedalus, who was a master craftsman, he created a pair of wings made of feathers and of wax. And they thought that they would, so even before flight was invented, we already had people trying out things like this. So he told Icarus not to fly too close to the sun. Now, you will understand why. There's wax there, isn't it? Icarus forgot his father's directions and warnings, and he flew too close to the sky. The sun melted his wings, and he plunged to his death to the ocean. This is taken as a symbol of over ambition. Very often we use this term nowadays with anyone who has achieved something. Don't fly too high. So here too, it was he says, who jumped to catch the sun. He had overconfidence. He tried to overreach himself, go beyond his boundaries. All right, to give it to my loving friends to keep. Now, this is interesting. He doesn't want it for himself. All right, he wanted to show, it was a show of power, it was a show of his capabilities, and he wanted to show his power and his capabilities to his loving friends. This is again important, that he did have some loving friends at that point. All right, not man could do could I have left undone. Nothing that man could do could I have left undone. And you see my harvest, what I reap. And what happened as a result? As you sow, so you reap. So what did he sow? He sowed overconfidence. And he risked, and what did he reap as a result? He reaped sorrow. All right. So because probably if he had been more moderate, probably if he had taken all this adulation with a pinch of salt, he had not been carried away by fame. If he had been carried, if he'd remembered that all this is swiftly passing, and if you're a hero today, there's already another hero waiting in the wings for you tomorrow. If he had remembered all that, perhaps this passage would not have been so swift and so difficult for him to take. Yes.
Ma'am, can we take a
yes,
call?
Yes,
from Maharashtra, Piyush Kadi is online. Hello, Piyush. Good afternoon. First of all, you have to mute the television set volume. Can you hear us?
Hello.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Piyush. We
Ma'am,
can
I
hear
had
you.
a question. Ma'am, I had a question that some people are throwing stones on me while staying straight.
We can't hear you properly. First, you have to mute the volume of your television set. Then only you can talk to us.
Yes. Yes, ma'am. Why are some people throwing stones on me?
Why are some people?
Throwing
Throwing stones on me?
Become later. If you become a traitor, won't they throw stones at you? Isn't it? That's a reflection of the public hatred, their disenchantment, the sense of disappointment at somebody. So anyway, we'll come to that. It's obvious you've done the poem before. So, not man could have I left undone, and you see my harvest. So you see the dramatic monologue is coming out. He's speaking to someone when he says, and you see my harvest, what I have reaped. This very day, and this comes as a refrain. What is a refrain? A refrain is a line or a number of lines that keep getting repeated through the poem. He's already said at the end of the first stanza, a year ago on this very day. And here again he says, this very day, now a year has passed. A year has run. All right. So you get this kind of a refrain coming. So the time element in the poem is very important, and we are not ever, made to forget that this is time. You cannot say, oh, that was long ago in the past, and naturally you run your, you've outrun your share of fame. It was only a year ago. He could not even probably savor his flame, though he takes the blame. He says, I jumped too high, I reached too high, and I tried to get the sun for my friends. All right. Also, I tried to do some things which were impossible. you know. And remember, always we are told that about the golden mean, that everything is in moderation. You should not have anything that's not moderate, that's beyond moderate, and that's exactly what happened. You know, he did not have time to, it was a heady feeling, and what happens when you have a heady feeling? It's like drinking. He was drunk on the wine of fame and success, and therefore what happened was that he felt that that wine went to his head, and he started doing things. So now he thinks in retrospect that he started doing things which which probably did not augur well with the, or go down well with the people. All right. So he says, alack, it was I who leaped at the sun to give it my loving friends to keep. Not man could do, have I left undone. So in a way, he's also trying to justify. He said, whatever a man could do, I have done. All right. And you know, it's not that sometimes when we are not getting the response that we want, we often sit down and think and say, was this right? I mean, could I have done anything more? But here the speaker is completely sure. Obviously, it is someone in public life, all right, and he is completely sure that whatever a man could have done, he had done with his position or whatever the responsibility that had been given to him. And but he says, and perhaps here there is a sense of regret, because he says, see, I did so much, and what do I reap? I reap the anger of the crowd. Yes.
No, ma'am, I have a call.
Yes, tell me.
Yeah. Antima Vedarthi is waiting for us. Hello, Antima.
Yes, ma'am, I have a question.
Yeah.
That in the second stanza, the air flows into a biscuit bell.
Yes.
What's the meaning?
What's a mist? A mist is small droplets of water which are dispersed, and that's why I gave you the image of the rain. All right, when you have very light fine rain, or when there is rain outside and you're going to close your window, there's a mist of rain coming. Actual meaning of mist is a thin cloud. All right, but here a mist of rain, we call it a mist of bells, a mist of sound. So almost a thin sound of bells covering the whole atmosphere, just as when you're driving into the mountain, you know, you have this mist that seems to envelop you all over. Here it is the very same thing. All right.
Okay, ma'am. If you allow me,
Yes.
can I take a commercial break?
Certainly, certainly.
So, thank you so much, and it's time to take a commercial break, and we'll be back shortly. Welcome back to Lockdown Classroom after the break, ma'am.
Thank you. So we have finished the first three stanzas, and already in the first three stanzas, we've had the passage from fame to lack of fame. He's already been cast aside by the crowd, and from the past we've moved into the present. When he says, alack, it was I. Now he realizes, there's a sense of realization, first perhaps mixed with disbelief. I mean, why has this happened to me? Now the contrast comes, and I'll be reading them side by side, all right. It might get a little confusing, but it will help you. Remember what he had said, the walls rocked with the crowd and cries, all right. So what had happened, there were people on every housetop, there were people on the church spires, there were flags on the church spires, probably there was so many people, there was no room, space anywhere. Today, he says, there's nobody on the housetops now. So obviously, when is the speaker speaking this? As he is being marched to his execution. All right, and he looks around him, and the scene is so different. There's no one on the housetops now, just a palsied few at the windows set. Palsy is a disease like paralysis. So these people were sitting at the window, probably nobody to move them from here and there. So some palsied few sitting at the windows. Remember, you always, when you're answering your questions and you get a question, contrast it with this, the old walls rocked with the crowd and cries. And today he says, there's nobody on the housetops now, just a palsied few at the windows set. For the best of sight is all allow. The best sight. Again, the fickle nature of the crowd, as I had said earlier, that a crowd cannot be relied upon. When he had said that the crowd was all there. Now where are the crowd? All allow, all agree. He says, at the shambles gate. Where has the crowd gone? The crowd has gone to the gate through which a person is carried to or brought in to his execution. And so now the excitement of the crowd, you know, the crowd seems to be somewhat, you know, you're frightened that the same crowd which was full of so much adulation now can turn so quickly, and today now where are they? They are hungry to see him hung. They are hungry for some sort of revenge, all right, and they are all crowding where? At the shambles gate, and there are some even more eager, they are at the scaffold's foot. The scaffold is a wooden structure from which people are hung, all right, and some of them have gone and stood there. Now around the same time another person was writing about something about executions. The person was Charles Dickens, all right, and he's written a novel called The Tale of Two Cities, A Tale of Two Cities, and there, you know, he talks about how the French mobs would crowd around the guillotine when the nobles would be carried for their execution. So probably, you know, in those days the public behaved like this, you know, where they would line up the streets not only to greet people, but also when they saw somebody in disgrace being carried, there would be jeers and taunts by the crowd. And here where they are no longer at their housetops to greet him. Instead, they are standing outside Shambles Gate, or the more eager ones have already reached the scaffold where they are going to hang him. There is a kind of a very, very strange curiosity which is operating on the crowd at this moment.
Yes, ma'am, can I
Yes,
take a
certainly.
Yeah, Srishti Mukhopadhyay is waiting for us. Hello, Srishti. Good afternoon.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Yes, miss. I'm afraid I'm a bit late, but I had a question from the second paragraph.
All right.
Miss, here the poet, is he being rude to the crowd who was shouting praises for him? Was he being rude?
Good afternoon, that's a good question, Srishti, very good one. He is not rude, he is arrogant. You know, what does fame do to you? It goes to your head. I've been telling you a long time, no? That it is a heady feeling, and when you are heady, you sort of feel you've got all the power in the world. And he says no, he says, had I said, and it's not the poet, it's the speaker. Remember, the writer writes in the, you know, he uses various kinds of alter egos. So here also he says, I know you mean good folk may our noise repels. Now he says, had I said that stop yelling and shouting and cheering, but get me the sun. They wouldn't have minded it at all. They would have probably said, yes, yes, what else do you want? We will get everything for you because you are our hero today. All right. So they are standing by the scaffold's foot. I trow, I know. I go in the rain. Probably fame, you bask in the sun of fame. And now he is going to his shame. So therefore, there is rain. I go in the rain, and more than needs, a rope cuts both my wrists behind. And more than required needs, a rope cut. So you get again a visual image, isn't it? Right. In the previous stanza also, you could almost paint it. A deserted street, a few people sitting, and where are the people? Side by side, you could have another picture of a lot of people. If I was an artist, I would have drawn it and brought it for you people. A lot of people standing near the, what do you call it? The Shambles Gate and the scaffold. So he says that they are standing there, and he is now going in the rain. A rope is cutting both his wrists. They've tied a rope, and his wrists, his hands are tied behind the back, his back. All right. So the bright weather of his fame, of the great days of his life have passed, and now you can see it is foul weather with him. and I think by my feel, my forehead bleeds. Somebody had asked this question earlier when you rang in. By my feel, I can feel the blood trickling down my forehead. How? Somebody flung, whoever had a mind, whoever wanted to. All right. So, whoever wanted to earlier had cheered him. Now, whoever wanted to, they can jeer him. All right. And how are they jeering him? They are throwing stones at him, and one stone has struck him on the forehead and he is bleeding. So, do you see that there is a very strong contrast here that is coming from his past and his present? And why are they flinging the stones? They're just not randomly doing it. For my years' misdeeds, for all the errors that he has made. All right. See, when probably he was famous, they had seated him in their hearts, their minds, they had lifted him high, probably they had given him a very high position of power. All right. When they gave him a position of power, what did he do? Probably he misused it, or that's the perception. That's another thing in this poem. Two senses of perception come to us. One is the perception of the speaker, who is a public figure, and who feels he's done the best that he could, though he admits that he leapt too high, he overreached himself. But there was also another perception, probably he had done all that he could, and that probably if you ask any public figure who has fallen from fame to infamy, and you say that what actually happened, and they'll tell you, I don't know, I did the best that I could, and nothing happened. I mean, I don't know why the crowd turned against me.
Yeah.
So,
ma'am, may we take a
yes,
call?
please.
Prakriti Priya is calling us from Jharkhand, Dumka. Hello.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, dear.
Ma'am, sorry I'm a bit late.
No.
Ma'am, my question is from second stanza.
Yes.
There is a word good folk.
Good folk. Yes.
Ma'am, what determines here?
I didn't understand.
What
Good folk.
determines the good folk?
He feels these are just as good people. I mean, of course, to him they are good people, aren't they? Because they've given him so much love and so much fame. It would be just a form of address, good people. Okay. So, I'll just read these two stanzas again to show you the contrast that has happened. There's nobody on that. Please remember, when you're reading this, when you're hearing this, just glance over the first two stanzas. There's nobody on the housetops now, just a palsied few at the window set, for the best of the sight, and there's a hint of pain here, and also a hint of bitterness, for all allow at the shambles gate, or better yet, by the very scaffold's foot. I know. They're all near the scaffold's foot, waiting for me to be hung, waiting for me to be punished for my sins. I go in rain, and more than necessary, more than needs, a rope cuts both my wrists behind. Both my wrists are tied behind, and a rope is cutting through them, and I think by the feel my forehead bleeds. For they fling, whoever has a mind, stones at me for my years' deeds. So, in fact, you can make two columns, and you know, when he was famous, the behavior of the people on one side, and when he is infamous or when he is fallen out of favor, the kind of behavior that the people, you know, depict, that they show. And we come to the last stanza, but there's a lot left. All right. So, the people who had thrown flowers in his path have now thrown stones at him, and his forehead is bleeding. And you can understand the sense of shame, of indignity, of bewilderment that he is understanding. Now, he uses the word misdeeds. Whether is he admitting to his misdeeds, that the poet leaves for us to decide, or is it that the people think that he's done something wrong? Look at our current scenario, isn't it, that we think that people in power think that they are doing the best that they can, but we feel no, they haven't done enough. There's always a difference in perception in the case of public figures. Even your teachers, your principal, you know, your parents, they feel they're doing the best for you, but you often feel, oh, they haven't done enough. They could have done a little bit more for you. Yes.
Another call for us. Rupsha Dotto is calling us. Hello, Rupsha.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Ma'am, I'm asking from the third stanza,
Yes.
first line.
Yes.
What is the meaning of leaped?
Jumped. To leap, to jump. So I told you about the Icarus imagery, that he had leaped at the sun. Now he is comparing himself, or a reader who knows about Icarus would immediately understand what he means, that he had jumped at the sun. Had he literally jumped, stood on his terrace and said, all right, let me jump, look at the sun and jump at it? No. The sun represents the ultimate for all of us, isn't it? As high as the sun and the moon, you read when you are children. So therefore he had leaped at the sun. He had jumped too high, not literally, but he had tried to do things which were probably beyond him, and probably if he was wiser he would not have done those things. So he jumped, he leaped at the sun, and that just as Icarus came to his his condition, he fell to his death, he too in this sense also this leads him to his terrible disastrous condition at the moment. Yeah. So he says, and now the last stanza where he says, thus I entered. Again, do you see how the whole poem is an echo? The last 3 or 4 stanzas seem to echo whatever he said in the first stanza, but in a different sense. Thus I entered. In this way I entered, and thus I go. See the contrast. He even realizes the contrast himself. He doesn't need to, people to tell him, he's understood it himself. Thus I entered, and thus I go. And he thinks he's been paid for all his deeds by the world. And then he says, in triumphs, people have dropped down dead. Many people at the moment of triumph, is it better? Now that's what he's thinking. Should I have died then? If I died at that point, it would have been better for me. All right, I would have died at the height of my powers, height of my fame, height of the love that people could have given me. Paid by the world. But now he's been paid by the world. What do you owe me? God might question. God questions him, what do you owe me now? And now instead, who will owe him? It's God. What does God owe him now? Proper judgment. I am safer so. One trait of his poetry, Browning's poetry, is that there's a strong note of optimism in his poems. So what does he do? Here too, he reaches his death, he's going to go to the scaffolds, he's on his way to the scaffolds, and he feels that perhaps God will understand me. The people have not understood me. Probably they've misunderstood whatever I have done. Many people in the moment of triumph have also died. I have not died in that way. So normally God asks, what do I owe God? But I will ask God the same question. It's God's time to repay me for this present condition that I am in. And then he says, perhaps it is better so. And there is a note of resignation there. He feels that true judgment might be assured with God. The people had not judged him correctly. Perhaps God will judge him. Very often don't we say that whenever we find ourselves misunderstood by people? We say God will. There's a God above. There's something that we constantly keep saying, that there's a God above. So he also feels this. Now, if there's time, I'll tell you why this becomes very important in the context of the age. So in spite of all his sorrows, the speaker is optimistic. As I told you, this was one aspect of Browning's poems. In an earlier class, I've also said it. In one of the poems of Browning, it's called Pippa Passes. And Browning says these lines. He says, God's in his heaven, all's right with the world. Meaning that as long as God is in heaven, everything is all right in the world. The same feeling is represented here when he says that, well, it's safer so. It leaves us with a feeling of deep pathos. As we ponder, we think fame is so fragile. All of us want fame. I'm getting my 2 minutes of fame here sitting in the ABP studios. I never thought I would be in a television studio ever in my life. All right, but then it's all fragile. It finishes. At the end of this, at 1 o'clock, nobody will even think of me after that. All right, so fame, and then in a bigger context, I've said this in a very small context, but you know, we get very attached to fame. And we feel that, oh, fame is the most important. We fight and scratch and we do all kinds of things and scrabble to get our way to fame, and then it passes. We have it for a time and it passes away.
Yes,
question? Yes.
We have a call, another call from Anishka Sinha, Jharkhand. Hello, Anishka. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I wanted to say that in the last paragraph we saw the nature of both crowd and people, but according to I wanted to ask that whose nature was more had more slightness or wrong.
I didn't understand. Could you repeat your question, please?
Yes, ma'am. Once.
We can't get you, Anishka.
1 minute, ma'am.
Okay, okay. Take your time.
Ma'am, in the last paragraph, we saw that the nature of both crowd and praetor was fickle. And according to which, I want to ask, whose nature had more mistake or slight?
Who would you think has made a mistake? Isn't it? So, now that's why I use the word perception. All right? The crowd thinks, it's not the last paragraph, it's the last stanza. And just earlier on, we've seen the crowd is fickle, they've changed very quickly. The narrator, the poet, the speaker himself doesn't think that he's being fickle. He has remained steady. Probably he has become over ambitious. Now, obviously, what you are trying to say is the question that might come to you from in the question paper. Who would you think is correct? Are the people correct or the speaker correct? Well, we are seeing the whole situation from one person's point of view, because the crowd hasn't talked to us. We haven't gone to the crowd and asked the crowd, no, why are you behaving so badly with him? Isn't it? So, therefore, the whole poem is geared towards the speaker. When we will be discussing the discussion questions, you'll see that's one thing that I have put down, the 4-mark questions, where you will have to talk about your point of view. What is your personal reaction to the poem? So, as I said, therefore, going back to what we were saying, it leaves us with a sense of deep pathos. We do not feel, ah, look, he deserves what he got. I don't think any one of us reading this poem feels that sense, oh, the people are justified in doing what they are, all right, because what they are doing, because we feel that, well, probably we should have heard his side of the story, and we ponder, we think about the fragility of fame. Strangely enough, in the speaker also, there is no feeling of bitterness. There is a feeling of resignation. He resigns himself to his fate and to what God has in store for him. And again, he is optimistic. He's had a very bad run of fate at the last moment, isn't it? A year ago, he was very, very happy, but now in a good situation, but now he is in a bad situation. And he is not bitter. See these people, how much I have helped them. This is what they do. No, this is not what he says. There is a sense of regret. All right, and the sense of resignation which brings him to God and which tells him that God will decide and God will repay me even if the people have not. Yes.
Okay, we have another call
Yes.
from Prutush Ghosh. Hello, Prutush.
All right.
Prutush, you have to first mute the volume of your television set and then you can only talk to us. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, good
Hello?
afternoon.
Good afternoon. I have a question on the second stanza, last 3 lines. Could you please explain it?
All right.
Okay.
All right, I'll just go back. And he said, so he says that had I said, good folk, mere noise repels. You see, the people were greeting him, they were feting him so much, and they were treating him so well. And he says, actually what he's trying to say, had I asked anything from them, they would have given them to me, even if I had asked something which was impossible. And what would be the impossible? The sun. So he says, good folk, mere noise, the noise that you're making repels me. it distracts me, it upsets me, it disturbs me. But give me something else. Don't only give me your love and adulation. Don't only give me the cheers that you are giving me at the moment. Give me your son. And they would have said, of course, what more? They wouldn't have even stopped to think that that was something that he could not have given. So you can see that if you sum up the whole poem, it is a passage of a very public figure, a person who's, and the title is The Patriot, all right. So there's a hint at the title. All public figures probably have to go through this. They might not be hanged, but we have enough of that also around the world. Examples of great figures who have been they've been put into power, and then very soon they are dragged down by the public. So here too, how a speaker, he goes up in the estimation of the people. He goes up so high that even if he had wanted the sun, they would have happily given it to him. And the sun image comes twice in the poem. One is when he says, give me the sun, and it is impossible, the impossible. And the second is when he says that if I had jumped up at the sun. Again, there of course it means overconfidence. All right. So we see the passage. So he begins with the happiness, the jubilation, the kind of adulation that the crowd shows him, and towards the end of the poem, that same crowd, that same road through which he had travelled in such happiness and with such sense of power, now the same road is being travelled by him in sorrow, in humiliation. He is probably being jeered at by whichever people are there lining the road. They are even throwing stones at him to express the hatred, and they are also, his hands are tied. From a patriot, he becomes a traitor. Yes.
Ma'am, another question from us. For us, Reshmi Dayani is calling from Lucknow.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes,
how are you?
Thank you. Fine.
Ma'am, my question is, I am unable to understand the meaning of first line of fifth stanza, that is, I go in the rain. What does rain refers here?
Rain, probably it's a literal rain, all right. It doesn't mean rain, and also it might mean the rain of sorrow. All right, I go in rain. Probably it's, he's setting the scene. There's a mild rain somewhere. Previously, there was the mist of joy, the mist of the church bells. I've said there are a lot of contrasts in this poem, and now there's rain and the rain, when it rains, sometimes it's very, very distressing, you feel depressed. So the feeling is one of depression. The contrast between the exhilaration of the first few stanzas and the depression of the last few stanzas. Yes. So I'll go on to the assignments that you have, and before we talk about the practice work, may I just mention to you, and this is very important, read the poem word by word, line by line. I am very happy that some of you kept asking me questions and kept asking me to explain certain terms, because your questions in the ICSE are very detailed. I am sure you will be able to do the 3 markers, which are very textual in nature. I am looking at the 4 markers, that is the last question and every reference to the context, which is an analysis question, where you as a student, you as an examinee are required to analyze the question. So the first one is, draw a contrast between the speaker's moment of fame and his humiliation. And the best way to do it, in your practice homework copy, try and make a column, make 2 columns, write out which stanzas, which lines talk about his fame, and which stanzas and which lines talk about his humiliation. If you divide the 2, it's very easy for you to write the answer. Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Please
The next question is, which words and expressions in the poem convey the atmosphere? This again is very important. When you are reading, use a marker or a highlighter to underline the words. For example, I told you about roses and myrtles. I told you about, use all the similes, the metaphors, the church spire which was flaming, all right, the houses which were swaying, that is the atmosphere. But there's also another atmosphere in the poem, all right, the atmosphere when he is moving towards his execution, there's also a very depressing atmosphere, and the poem, as I've said earlier, it operates on contrast. So you get a difference between the two. Very, very detailed knowledge of your text, very, very thorough study of your text is very necessary to answer the questions. What do you feel for the speaker as he narrates his feelings? You know, the feeling will start in the beginning. You're curious. I mean, why is he getting so much? You're interested. And somehow the poet drags you into the narrative, what he's telling you about the speaker, the patriot, the public speaker, and his feelings. So, you know, you get an idea, therefore, that, your feelings, you must think about the feelings. Is it interest? Is it curiosity? You know, you're standing back objectively and you're watching the speaker's condition move from one state to another. And then as it moves, you know, you feel yourself empathizing. There's a difference between sympathizing and empathizing. Sympathizing is you feel for, and empathy is you feel with. So you start feeling with him, because this can happen to the best of us even if we are not patriots. You know, that very soon we are in somebody's favor, but then we fall into disfavor just as fast, and then there's nobody beside us.
Okay,
Yes.
ma'am, thank you so much for such wonderful explanation on the story, and that's the
Thank
end
you.
of our today's class. But before signing off, I would like to remind you about tomorrow's class. Again, tomorrow we have an English class, and tomorrow our subject will be English language comprehension, one-word composition and project work. লকডাউনে ক্লাসরুম আজ এই পর্যন্ত। সব খবরের জন্য আপনাদের চোখ থাক শুধুমাত্র এবিপি আনন্দে।